Hello fellas, Mr. Minimicrobe here again, and welcome back to the Skin Tier List series, where we are still in the process of ranking every single skin in Paladins history. As usual, we got a lot to cover, so I'll make this short. If you're new, I tend to value the most these four factors: the general skin quality, how well detailed the skin is, albeit not overly so, the skin's theme and how well it's implemented, and lastly, how faithful the skin is to its original character. Those are what truly make a great skin, in my opinion. I value different things specifically for crossover skins, but I'll cover that when I actually get to it in the video itself here. As usual in the background, Skillazzy, my girlfriend, helped me rank every single skin, and just a friendly reminder that these are simply our opinions on the matter and are in no way objective. So feel free to voice your thoughts in the ye olde comments in a civil manner. That being said, intro over and let's get back into it. But before we get to the full patches, there's one thing we forgot to cover last time, which is Rambo Viktor. Got weirdly released awkwardly between a couple of patches, so we just didn't notice it was there, therefore we're covering it now.
I'm Rambo.
So like, his clothes aren't interesting, obviously. I kind of have conflicting feelings since, yeah, it's Rambo, what else are you gonna do? At least this form of normal, boring human clothing actually fits in the fight. Like, take all the beach stuff, it doesn't fit in a fight no matter how you slice it. And it's just boring normal human clothes. I feel like Rambo is wearing the absolute epitome of just normal clothing, but at least it's kind of tactical, and thus fits much better into the battlefield of a game that is Paladins. The details of the clothing fit Rambo to a T in the sense that, again, it's kind of unimpressive, and if the character the skin is based on looks boring, the whole thing will end up being kind of boring, but despite that, it does look very oddly high quality. Not exactly much else to say about it aside from that, but yeah. The knife in its sheath there does look a little bit bent, like it's fused with both his waist and his thigh, so it's kind of weird. I feel like without the arrows of all things, the skin would look incredibly uninteresting, so strangely I feel they're kind of the sleeper detail for putting the whole skin together. I'm not super familiar with Rambo, so I just checked to see how much he actually uses a bow and arrow. Turns out he actually uses it quite a lot. Is a good detail and is quite accurate. His face is just fine, nothing weird. It kinda-ish reminds me of old Viktor, strangely enough, so bonus points for giving me that old Viktor nostalgia. Then of course his gun. We never actually get to see like modern weaponry or artillery in Paladins, and it both fits in well and looks super cool. Nothing much to say, it's just a good old-fashioned AK-47. Looks lovely and in first person. It's a bit skinnier than most of Viktor's weapons and feels slick as hell. Plus the old machete bayonet kind of deal. I don't know what to call that, but hey, it looks pretty dope. The red dot sight has kind of been complained as one of the only cases of what feels like a pay-to-win aspect. That doesn't exactly weigh into the rankings at all, but actually using it, it's super nice to have, it's quite fun to use, and does great aesthetically as well. And regardless, maybe a hot take, I don't know. I think it's a little silly to consider it pay-to-win. Like, it's really not. You can just get a crosshair add-on if you want pretty damn easily. Plus, I mean, there's other guns that Viktor has that doesn't even get rid of the crosshair, so really, oh well. In any case, it's a super basic crossover skin that does a great job in bringing over everything that already is very basic. Plus, it really fits into the game, so yeah. Also kind of fits Viktor, but in that way that Rambo might fit the average Minuteman kind of fashion, not in an actual, wow, it fits the character so well kind of fashion. Also, we don't really have any real nostalgia for Rambo, so unfortunately he's not going to get any extra points for that, which we definitely would give if we did. Now, this is a crossover skin, so we are ranking it a little bit differently than how we would rank usual skins. I will go way more into that when I come across the Rwby skins here, so expect a full explanation of how I'm ranking crossover skins once we get there. Long story short, I'm not taking nearly as much into consideration whether or not I like the theme or how many details there are in the skin, and I'm instead increasing the value of how much of the original character I see in the skin. That being said, Rambo is A tier. Alrighty, back to the regular scheduled program. We are going to go over the 5.3 Heart of Darkness patch, which also so happened to be the reveal of Lilith. That's not relevant, I just thought I'd bring it up. Corrupted Atlas. Lore-wise, it fits quite soundly. If Timeboy over here didn't save the world likely would have ended, thus Cthulhu kind of deal. A pretty fun take on the corruption concept. Turned, from what I can tell, relatively abstract theme to something quite realizable. The knees are often something Paladins kinda do, not badly, but are very often detailed in a repetitive fashion. There's already plenty of eyes in the skin, it's a little bit repetitive, but that's the only quote-unquote big complaint we really have. Figured I'd get it out of the way real quick. The design of the whole skin honestly looks really slick in a chunky fashion, despite not all of it feeling particularly inspired. The bottom half would definitely be nothing special if it weren't for the high quality, but the top half overall is much more interesting. Obviously, the face has Cthulhu inspiration, looks really sick, best part of the skin. The hood is also brought over from OG Atlas, but also gives off a kind of culty priest vibe that's often associated with Cthulhu. I wish there was possibly a little more going on with the arms. They do feel a little bit naked, just kind of showing off this buff glowiness like nobody's business, which does look pretty dope regardless. I mean, damn, he's jacked. His weapon was really creatively and I want to say ambitiously adapted. That isn't to say it's not without its drawbacks though. I wish it looked a tiny bit more like an actual gun. Everything about it technically looks great and I love the idea they went for. I just kind of feel like they could have pulled off this techie future gun being corrupted organically deal potentially better than what we actually ended up getting. That being said, it does still look cool. I'm just sensing a bit of missed opportunity as it really doesn't look like a gun and I kind of wish it did. It's super clear that the robotic animations are straight from the OG weapon, but if you extend your disbelief a little bit, I think it looks pretty cool, albeit a bit janky. Also, his weapon is definitely a different shade than the rest of his body. His recolor kind of does that too, but in a better way. Discoloring here, the comparison between his body and his weapon doesn't quite look as good, and it bothers me a little bit. Overall, a pretty solid skin with great theming, quality, and details, not to mention one or two cool references in the details. But I felt like the more I looked at it, the more I kept finding these little nitpicks that I feel like is going to keep it out of S tier. At this point, there's so many terrific skins in the game that a few nitpicks is all that's really needed to drop it down into A tier. Paladins just has good skins, man. You gotta nitpick. But yeah, as I said, A tier. And now we got Vile Atlas, the recolor. As I mentioned, the color of the weapon fits with the rest of the skin better, but I also think the color of the entirety of the skin is better on top of that. The bright green on the skin glows about as much as the red does on the original, but the tip of the gun glows way more and it looks so much better. As well as the purple eyes, again, just straight up looking better in my opinion. So yes, this recolor will rank above its original. Corrupted Io. Immediately, I feel the design stands out as just straight up better than Atlas's take in my opinion. Not to really say Atlas's is bad at all, it's just a wee bit more generic, even for a theme as relatively out there as corruption. This skin though gets across this almost mid-stage of transforming into a monster, with all this disgusting organ-esque and organic looking coverings with the teeth, as well as the spine looking armor similar to Vora's design. Speaking of Vora though, I would say this skin's organic design is most reminiscent of specifically Vora's weapon. It's a pretty interesting choice and it adapts weirdly really well. She's got a maggot tail like Viktor's dragon looking skin, except this one's actually done on purpose, and it actually fits this time, so that's a dub. The whole design flows in its icky grossness so damn well alongside the armor to where it's hard to specifically state what's so great about it. It's one of those skins that's altogether so good and well detailed that you can't really single out particular good things about it. It's all immaculate. Also similar to Atlas, Io is an appropriate champion lore-wise for a corruption skin due to her general feud with Vora from what I understand. Again, I'm not a lore buff, sue me, but yeah, you know, what if Io was corrupted instead of Vora for some reason? Alternate universe is hype. But also, due to this skin portraying the corruption of a character in a similar sense to how Vora was corrupted, this skin actually has the daunting task of not only having to reflect Io, but also incorporating a ton of Vora's design as well, and they pulled it off. Obviously, not as much is incorporated from Vora to Io. It's obviously Io's skin, but you get my drift. The organics, the bone, the spine, and Vora's adjacent armor that replaces Io's default armor, and even some of the more generic hard skin stuff that Atlas has, all flows perfectly and beautifully, reflecting all the nuances the theme entails both generically and based on the lore, while reflecting Io's character, alongside the usual high quality and a ton of great details. It's amazing. All this, and I haven't even talked about the weapon or the dog. The only complaint I can muster is that, okay, cleavage in your face, cool, hype, whatever. Fan service is fan service, you're not going to hear me complaining about it, but the commitment to the fan service does make it a tiny bit less interesting around the shoulder and chest area. It's really not by a whole lot, but it is a tiny bit naked in terms of interesting detail. But yeah, that's my only complaint about the whole skin. Not a huge amount to say about the weapon, but I want to say that in the best way possible. It looks great and fits the skin extremely well, while emphasizing the shininess that I haven't mentioned is dotted around all over the skin. Looks lovely, and it makes the weapon stand out by itself despite not being all that different. And of course, Luna.
Fetch me their soul!
They really didn't need to go ham with Luna, but they absolutely did. It's just an extension of all the good things I already said about the rest of the skin. Thus, this is by far the best skin for Luna. It goes so hard, dude. The effects and claws look great. Pretty much everything does. Luna looks better than he ever has. And lastly, the voice pack. I want to make this a bit of a big deal because historically I don't give a shit about voice packs at all. They most often take away from the original character or are just kind of cringe to where, unless they're extremely good, I literally just turn them off, period. What I'm trying to get across here is I generally don't like voice packs. I think it's great that skins have them, I think it's great that people enjoy them, but I just personally don't. As such, this is an extremely rare case with this skin specifically where this voice pack alone would already bump it up several points on the list. They somehow made Io fucking cool.
You win some, or you win some.
The voice pack reflects her to the exact same extent that the skin tastefully does, while also somehow malforming it in the same way that the skin does. And I mean, you'd think that this little high-pitched Io voice trying to be edgy would just end up being super cringe, right? That's definitely initially what I thought would happen. The thing is, it's not though. It's the only voice pack that I want to use over the default character's voice pack in the entire game. So yeah, a lot of praise, pretty good skin. Similar to Willow's Willow skin, it feels like the absolute perfect skin for Io. Fits her as well as her default with way more style and details to boot. The theme is adapted perfectly and technically even better than Willow's, because in this case the theme actually fits the game flawlessly as well. I mean, the theme is literally lore based in this case. I mean, come on. In short, near perfect skin. SS. I could go on, there's more I could praise, but I legit have to bite my tongue here so we can just move the fuck on. Frozen Moon Xiao. I really like this recolor for just getting across this icy vibe, you know? The last one seemed infernally threatening, this one seems unforgivingly bitter and cold. I think there's a tiny bit of odd color discrepancies that clash a little bit, the subtle pink on the weapon reflection, the purple on the tail, and the turquoise in the hair. Again, all stunning alongside the gorgeous glowing blue, but don't fit all together to perfection like the original corrupted skin. Plus, the original's contrasts showed a bit more of the details on her clothing a wee bit more, so Frozen Moon will be going below. Next up, unfortunately kind of being set up to fail, Dragonette Betty. Betty's first and only current skin. Unfortunately. Definitely feels like a step back in quality and details, while on top of that, it's just kind of boring. Obviously based on that Bowsette craze that people are on about, and yeah, pretty much ported it over one for one. But like, the simplicity looks fine in cartoon form, but in skin form, it's just, there's really not much to say. The clothing, shoes, and collar are nothing to write home about and leave very little to speak on here. It's symmetrical and it's dull. I like the shell portion, it looks fine, but the wings look like they're gonna snap off like a cheap action figure. They're pathetic. And the tail gives off the feeling of a little mega tail again. Like Viktor's skin, like Khan's skin, and unlike Io's skin, it looks like ass. Her hair color doesn't look good. Her ears look weird as hell. In fact, I thought they were her hair at first. The hair itself is mid as hell, better than nothing, but no, that's actually a pretty good description for the entire skin. Better than nothing. The horns are huge, which could be cool alongside a dope skin, but it accentuates nothing, and just ends up being another large section demonstrating lack of detail. Like, I know it's based on a cartoon, but it's so undetailed, I legitimately think I could pull up MS Paint and just draw the general design. It's so dull. In fact, while I was writing the notes about this skin, Lizzie decided to take that as a challenge. She actually pulled up MS Paint and did just that. Literally took her like 4 minutes. Dragonette, ladies and gentlemen. The colors are slightly discordant too, like the magenta on her waist and her crown are slightly different for some reason. Her collar is silver for some reason, despite all the other spiked rings being gold. And those stupid stripes on her face, they don't even look like they're shaded correctly. It looks straight up unpolished. The weapon's alright. It resembles a dragon, but doesn't work so well in doing so, ending up looking a little forced. It just reminds me of a worse Hi-Rez wolf weapon, but it is way more detailed and is higher quality than the entire skin, and thus falls in line with the average quality and detail count these days, unlike the rest of the skin. And I like the little crown. Just copy and pasted it from her head, but hey, tiny crown. It's cute. You gotta appreciate the small things about this skin, because literally they're the only good things about it. She also shoots eggs, literally using her offspring as ammo. Go off, queen. Go drag a bolt on their asses. Abortion cannon. Okay. Maybe I shouldn't say that. D tier. Better than nothing. Dunestrider Kinessa. So pretty simple skin in the usual Egyptian style akin to the Sands of Myth stuff. The standout details to me are how much of the little stereotypically Egyptian animals are used as details in the gun and in the back thing. I like that back thing. It's very reminiscent of her usual back thing, but different. There isn't a ton that stands out as immediately and insanely unique, but everything in terms of details and quality, as well as the general theme implementation, is all done super well. Very well done aesthetically as opposed to innovatively. Other than that, really not much to say about the body itself. Very nice details and nothing bad. Nice pants textures. Her face, makeup, hair, and hood combo is cute as hell, and fits the theme in the usual stylish fashion that the Egyptian skins tend to. Reflects Kinessa to a T as well. Almost feels perfectly transcribed over, almost uncreatively so, but still bonus points for how much Kinessa you can see in the skin. The gun as well, I want to say, does the animal on gun thing that we mentioned with Betty's skin, but just does it way better. Like, just the actual way you should be doing it, right? As opposed to it being a worse version of the Tyra direwolf, this one's just straight up a better version. It does feel a bit bulky in game and in general, but I mean, Kinessa's gun is pretty bulky as is, so I won't complain too much. But yeah, very normalized Egyptian skin. I say normalized because all the other older Egyptian skins went so damn hard, and this one, although it's still great in its own right, certainly doesn't innovate or push boundaries. It's a very safe skin, aka quite good, and that's definitely good enough to land it in A tier. Sandstrider Kinessa. I like the red better, I don't like the green better. Lizzie thinks it looks like a bathroom. I don't get it. I lied, I do kind of get it. The pants also don't have that fancy texture on them, so really the whole skin's more plain just straight up. I kind of like the slightly more subtle look of it, but it doesn't pop nearly as much, and it just straight up is less detailed. So yeah, this one is definitely a bit lower. Also, one thing we missed a long time ago was Viking Kinessa of all things. I guess we just didn't even think about it. Like, we just totally skipped over it. I didn't even think to rank it. I didn't even remember this skin. But hey, we're here. We're talking about Kinessa. Might as well cover it real quick. Trust me, this will not take long. Viking Kinessa. Pretty much completely a recolor aside from a few fluffs around the skin, and then just helmet. Very little to talk about, so I'll make this short. The red is pleasant and I like the extra details, or detail more like, and then the helmet just makes it into something that I'd never want to use. In my opinion, it looks dumb as shit. That's it. Oh, there's some weird stuff on her arms replacing the armor. Whatever that's supposed to be. I remember getting this skin just before the parts and pieces or whatever it's called was removed, and kind of actually being stoked because it's just one of those old skins that you figure you should have, and finally I could use the bottom half as a nice red Nye recolor. I swear it was like just a few days after when the patch came out that abolished parts and pieces happened, and as as a result, I never even got to use it without the helmet, which in my opinion condemned it to just a recolor of an absolutely mid variety. C tier. Alright, we're moving on to 5.4, the Rwby patch. Kind of a crazy patch, I'm not gonna lie. 7 skins were released this patch. In case you didn't know, that is more than any patch ever. But anyway, Rwby stuff. So I do have some history with Rwby, but real quick, I know people tend to hyperfixate on the negative when it comes to Rwby, and I really don't want my comment section to end up like that. So just a little disclaimer here, I know it might be kind of provoking it, but hopefully it doesn't. Please don't discuss your gripes with the show itself in the comments and stuff. From what I've seen, it tends to flow into passionate arguments on both sides very easily, so please don't. I'm begging you. We are here to talk about the skins and not about the show. With that being said, I'm now going to talk about the show. So I started watching Rwby during a pretty vital part of my growing up existence, and as a result, I'm about to say the most cancelable thing I think I've ever said up to this point. Rwby is kind of hype, and as an extension, if you cringe at the sight of heavily biased placements, I beseech you, please look away. This could be painful. For real though, I do adore this show for sure. Maybe for shallow reasons, but that doesn't change the fact that it is super important to me. The flashy designs, the choreography, the aesthetic, it really quelled my creativity for a while there, and this crossover is pretty much everything I ever wanted since the Genlock patch. Speaking of the Genlock patch though, I really regretted not knowing much about Genlock in my rankings of those skins, so mostly I just ended up having to rank them based on the usual and not due to how well they adapted the crossover character into the game, which is really how crossover skins such as these should be ranked. It wasn't really something I could help, but the difference here is I know much about Rwby, likely a bit too much. As a result though, I feel, although I am certainly biased, I'm also in a great situation to be able to somewhat accurately rank these skins on just how well they are brought over into the game itself, and as a result, I'm going to be changing my ranking criteria for crossover skins specifically here. Keep in mind this is just for crossover skins, alright? I'm going to keep my values on the skin quality the same, because that's important regardless. I'm going to change the quality and quantity of details to a more general, how much do I like the character that they're bringing over's design. I'm going to change how much I value the theme of a skin to simply how well the character itself was ported directly into Paladins, and straight up how faithful they were to the original source in every fashion, including the model, the character's attitude, style, even the voice backs. We want the character to feel as at home in Paladins as possible, while understanding the limitations that meshing two characters together might cause. And lastly, kind of feeding off of that, I'll change the whether the skin reflects the character is for to a similar, does the champion chosen to represent the crossover character support the character is trying to represent well, or at least well enough given the circumstances, right? And this includes everything, emotes, MVP poses, even abilities, everything. Again, the crossover character needs to feel as at home as possible, and inherently a crossover skin won't reflect the champion that the skin is actually for, which is a slight downer in my books, but since obviously that's not the point of crossover skins, this rule that I just mentioned will help mitigate that feeling, and I do think it's important for a champion to reflect his crossover counterpart about as well as it possibly could. That being said, that is all the criteria I'm using to rank the crossover skins. I'm done yapping, let's get into the actual skins themselves. Starting with Ruby Rose Vora. I really want to talk about arguably the most iconic thing to come out of the show itself, the scythe here, Crescent Rose. Now it is definitely a bit more cramped than I guess it could be, as comparing it to the show's weapon, the show's is definitely bigger, but it really doesn't bother me considering the adaptation they had to do to get this in the game to begin with. I think it still looks sick as hell. The textures on the metal itself could be a bit more, you know, metal-y. It's a bit more matted, so you know, it could look a bit better if I were to nitpick super hard, but again, having fucking Crescent Rose in the game at all easily makes up for it in pretty much every regard, I feel like. Like, all the main details are there, and considering the limitations, I don't think I could ask for anything more. The curve on the handle is definitely the biggest issue, I feel, just because it messes with the whole sniper rifle aspect of the whole sniper scythe deal. Like, she is not going to be aiming down that scope all that well. Despite that, again, it's understandable given the adaptation deal, and I mean, it's fucking Crescent Rose, dude. It looks fucking sick regardless. The body model itself, it might as well be perfect in my opinion. Now, I think it's pretty interesting, like, they could have made all the Rwby skins cel-shaded to be more like the show. Instead, they went on the route of adapting the characters into the Paladin style. Either works. I'm personally happy they went with this style. It's a bit more risky, and we'll see that come up with a bit of the Rwby skins down the road, but I think Rwby is adapted here pretty much as accurately as can possibly be. Also, I did want to mention real quick for those who don't know anything about Rwby at all, Rwby the show is pronounced exactly the same as Rwby the character, so that may or may not be a little bit confusing. Not that I can do anything about that though, so we're just gonna have to take what we can get here. Her volume 7 to 9 fit looks great as well. I would have settled for pretty much any Rwby design over the show's existence, and this one definitely looks pretty good. Everything's detailed well and high quality. Her face and hair, which I imagine would be kind of difficult to nail, is absolutely nailed in my opinion. Like I said, pretty much perfect as far as I'm concerned. The only real complaint model-wise is the curved handle on the scythe, but like I said, it is understandable why they had to go that route, so I'm perfectly willing to overlook it. But does Rwby fit with Vora though? Obviously, Vora's genocidalness doesn't exactly coincide with Rwby's kind and innocently commanding demeanor. The thing is, a lot of that slight maliciousness reflected in Vora's emotes and poses kind of just end up with Rwby looking all sassy and shit. It's not a side you see a ton with her, but it doesn't exactly feel that alien either. I think it's actually kind of fun. Vora's personality doesn't fit Rwby on paper, but effectively it does actually come out quite well, or at least it's certainly an interesting take on her. Not perfect, but far from the worst. worst. And definitely could be worse considering the characters are pretty much antitheses of each other. Rwby being all, I'ma save the world, as opposed to Vora's, I'ma fucking end it kind of deal. The voice pack is like, man, when I first booted up the shooting range and hit VVGH or whatever it is, I actually got like whiplash.
Hi, I'm back. Let's go again.
I felt like I was being yoinked directly into the show itself. It's so good. Now, a lot of Rwby voice packs in general are kind of cringe, I'm not gonna lie. Rwby's, however, is definitely the least offending in that matter. A lot of the references flow very well and in very natural and occasionally unique fashions.
All right, represent Team Rwby.
Some are a bit ham-fisted, but it's not nearly as bad as some others. I always start my missions off with a yang. Smile. And I mean, having the actual voice actors from the show is obviously phenomenal as well. As for abilities, I wish they could have done something with her primary. Like, I initially thought they could add some kind of effects to imply that she's actually shooting the rifle in the animation there, but I mean, Vora's projectiles hardly convey a rifle shot, so incorporating Rwby's semblance stuff with the rose petals is not only a vibe, but is also quite practical and honestly looks quite lovely. For those that don't know, a character's semblance in Rwby is just like their little special power. Rwby's semblance involves her turning into rose petals for some reason and zipping around, which is, minus the zipping around part, essentially what you see here with her primary. Her secondary is an extension of that. I remember actually like legitimately giving it some thought. How are they going to adapt this ability? What could they possibly do to make this move feel natural for Rwby? Eventually coming to the conclusion of they gotta do something with her semblance, and to my surprise, that's exactly what they did. It fits her amazingly well, pretty much exactly what I envisioned. I was pretty surprised. Her vine is like, okay, Rwby obviously never does this in the show, like ever, but I mean they had to adapt it somehow, and making it this kind of mechanical looking grapple honestly works really well. It's very believable for the universe, and I could really see her pulling it off in the show, even if it's never been explicitly shown. And that is something important to mention as well here. For abilities that really can't be faithfully adapted from the show like this one, it is important to still make the ability as believable for the character as possible. Vora's grapple here is a prime example. There was really no way to make it fit Rwby without putting in way more effort than it would be worth, but the compromise that they made here is impressively well executed regardless. Vora's Q is stylistically the same as her primary, so it's just fine. Still wish we could hear some of Crescent Rose's classic shooting sound effects, but limitations are limitations. Her ultimate though is certainly the most prevalent clash of personalities though. The effects look cool, but like, yeah, what could they have done here? She like floats menacingly around in a way I can't really bullshit into sassiness, but also more prominently, Rwby can't float, so yeah. Rounding everything out though, the abilities, emotes, poses, and the general skin itself, I think this is not only a near perfect representation of Rwby from the show, as she is my favorite character, it's also pretty much everything I ever wanted in a skin representing her. Everything about the skin looks gorgeous, everything's brought over near flawlessly, and the only things that aren't totally flawless are things that kind of make you go, yeah, that kind of makes sense that they had to do that. Amazingly adapted in my opinion, and the absolute golden standard for a great crossover skin, alongside massive amounts of bias. SS. Also, now that we're hanging out in the upper tiers here, I'm going to move Willow up one slot. It's just better. That's it. Weiss, Schnee, Furia. So, spoiler, a lot of my opinions on the Weiss skin are the same as the Rwby skin. They're kind of goated. There obviously still is a lot of differences to go over, though. The champion chosen to represent Weiss feels so spot on. Like, Furia and Weiss both share this regal, even pompous ferocity in their personalities and actions during and not during fights. It's such a good match. Makes everything they do feel so emblematic of each other in such a natural way. The emotes, the poses, it fits so well. Minus the wings. She's just kind of floating there. Now Weiss can technically do that with her glyphs and crap, but you know, if that's what they want to get across, I feel like they should have, you know, actually implemented it. I don't think it would have been that hard to just put a PNG of a glyph under there. I think it'd be sick, but oh well, it is what it is. Regardless, I want to say the model execution is just as perfect as Rwby's. Not an absolute ton of quality details in general, but I'd argue since her fit doesn't exactly call for it, it wouldn't make any sense to dock crazy points for such a thing, unless the design of the character is just straight up dull as a result, hence Rambo's skin to some extent. Regardless, almost perfect adaptation from the show. However, I do have a couple nitpicks. She's got a little bit of what I like to call babyface syndrome. Something about her face just isn't quite right. It's passable for sure. The best I could kind of describe it is that it's a little bit cutesified, a little more anime-esque, a little more baby-esque than I feel it really needed to be. Still just fine, very passable, but it does feel different to Weiss. I know the face is pretty damn important, but it's really not that bad. Also, her sword Mutinaster is like, it's perfect. The model on paper looks so good. The issue is quite similar to Crescent Rose. It had to be made to fit Furia's sword model. As a result, it's actually a bit bigger than it should be, and this just kind of less reflects how it should feel in game as compared to the very precise and disciplined way she uses it in the actual show, which, you know, it might not sound like much, but the weapon play in the show is incredibly important in my opinion. In the beginning volumes, it held most of the identity of the entire show, and as such, messing with the proportions of the weapons does for sure make a big enough difference to bring up. It kind of had to happen, but it is a bit of a gripe regardless. regardless. When it comes to how well Furia's abilities mesh with Weiss's though, it surprisingly doesn't work that badly. Like Weiss is almost the mage-esque character of the main group anyway, so a lot of the adaptations they made can just be kind of chalked up to, well, that's something that Weiss potentially could do, I guess. It's in that realm of believability, right? Does she shoot her sword like this? No, but you know, it's not outside of what you expect she could do, especially since she is one of the main users of dust, which in case you're not familiar, dust is basically just elemental powers in a can. Healing people now, that's a bit less believable for Weiss, but hey, dust, right? It benefits by just how nondescript dust can be in the show. So maybe there's some kind of healing dust in the show. I don't know, there's fucking gravity dust or some shit. Her ultimate, same kind of deal. I don't even know what kind of magic causes people to do more damage anyway, but Weiss does kind of do the support role a lot in the show, so it's still in that kind of realm. Then there's her Q, which is basically just what Weiss does in the show at times. It's actually kind of hype how perfect it is. And her mobility shoots her little glyphs out, which, you know, dust, but also is just cute as shit. I'd say Weiss overall fits into Furia's shoes, so to speak, incredibly well. Personality-wise, it is almost perfect. The abilities need to be stretched a bit to work in my head, but they still work just fine. Her design is also sleek as hell and super pretty. I didn't even talk about her hair, which looks freaking gorgeous. A few relatively minor gripes with her face and her weapon, but aside from that, just like Rwby's skin, pretty much the absolute standard for crossover skins in general. Also, her voice is...
The Schnee family legacy is mine to uphold, and I'll do so as a huntress.
Okay, it's cringe. I'll be real, it's super cringe. She really sounds like she's trying to be cool alongside ham-fisting quotes from the show. I think it's super cute. I think it's goated.
Affirmative.
But it's also really cringe. Once again, SS. He has no shame. Blake Belladonna Saati. So with Blake's skin here, I feel like the standout thing is just that the model is kind of just flawless, almost. Like I just have 0 nitpicks. Good job. It looks great. I guess it could be higher quality, I guess. But I mean, just like the other Rwby skins, it really doesn't need the higher quality to accentuate what adapting the character requires accentuating. Like, it's just fine. It's good. They even changed her coin into Lien, the Rwby currency. It's dope. Her face, hair, and ears look super cute. Her gun looks really good for being a cross between Saati's and Gamble Shroud, and just in general, her fit is super slick. Now, despite that, Blake's definitely a tough character to find a, I guess, representative for. Like, Blake tends to really get up close and personal in the show, definitely preferring to use her entire Gamble Shroud rather than just her gun, right? And I think that is more so true to Blake's character here than it is to the previous 2 Rwby characters there. The problem is, of course, this is a shooter. Paladins is a shooter. As much as I'd like her to be, you know, swinging swords all up in here, it obviously wasn't going to happen, and I'm personally so glad they didn't try to cram Blake into Xin. That would have been a disaster in my opinion. Regardless though, it does definitely undermine the fact that Blake's a fucking ninja, right? It's obvious why it had to happen, I get it, but it is an issue. There's also a few things missing on the skin, I feel. You know, things that just really make Blake Blake. Partially by necessity, I'm sure, but the handle of her weapon lacks its classic ribbon that she uses to swing it around, and the cleaver portion of Gamble Shroud just straight up isn't present. That's some pretty important things when it comes to Blake's design. Alongside that fact, Blake and Saati aren't exactly flawless picks when it comes to compatible personalities. Blake is often portrayed as the low-key, very moral-based, think before she does things, level-headed until she needs to protect folks kind of deal. Meanwhile, Saati is kind of just the complete opposite of all those things. Doesn't care what's going on, is a fucking bounty hunter, kills for money, drinks her sorrows away. Yeah, you can kind of see why they might not reflect each other so well. Despite that, it actually doesn't work too badly. Like, Blake's not immune to sass, and that's kind of just what Saati's emotes and poses employ, so I don't know, it's not half bad. I guess that is generally helped by the fact that Saati has very little poses in general. Just like Rwby's, it can kind of be interpreted as all sass, and for Blake, it's definitely an interesting, albeit not super unrealistic take on her. And speaking of interesting takes on her, what the hell is going on with her voice pack?
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Like, one second she's having an existential crisis about the fact that she's alive after dying.
I'm back? I'm back!
And the next, she's pouring out her heart and soul to some random-ass teammate because I decided to spam VVS.
I'm so sorry.
Like, she's always either yelling way more than I remember her doing in the show, or literally sounding like she's on the verge of tears. Bipolar as hell, it's freaking unhinged.
Why are my ears tingling? I don't like that.
For abilities, her primary... it's a gun. Blake is known to shoot guns. Shocker. Okay, one problem I do actually have in general with the Rwby skins. Rwby has really recognizable sound design, especially with the characters' respective weapon shooting sound effects. I've always felt like that sound design was really important to the characters. And yes, I don't value that stuff hugely when it comes to skins, but this is kind of important to me, and I really wish that was more incorporated into the sound design in general for all the Rwby skins. But especially for Blake's here, what they have in the game just sounds quite weak. And here, I'll even edit in Gamble Shroud's OG sounds. Doesn't that sound better? I have no clue what that sounds like, by the way. I gotta do this shit in post. I'm assuming it sounds way better. I get why it couldn't be implemented into Ruby's and Weiss's weapons, but I don't really see an excuse for Blake's here. It's actually a bit disappointing. Regardless, her backflip definitely fits well. Blake's acrobatic, definitely something she'd do. Plus, dust. Her Q is like, man, if only they changed it so like Blake would actually stick a shadowy version of Blake's model down instead of the cardboard cutout. I mean, man, it could have been so sick, dude. Probably expecting too much out of a single skin. I understand that, but yeah. At the very least, Saati's Q actually represents Blake's little shadow jutsu semblance thing well, in essence, if not straight up. And then of course there's her alternate fire and her ultimate. Blake would never do either of these things, obviously, so we take what we can get. But yeah, as much as I worried initially for how well she'd be reflected despite some hangups, I think using the simpler approach of using Saati as a base worked out pretty damn well. The model is near perfect, if not so. The characters meshing together made some weird yet understandable artifacts, but still fits together surprisingly well, and overall I think the execution is very good. A few compromises definitely had to be made, does bring it down a little bit, but still ends up being a very solid crossover skin. They even changed her weapon inspect animation to address the giant blade on top of her gun. It's nothing crazy, but hey, at least she's not slicing her fucking hand in half every time she looks at her gun. Unless of course she reloads with an empty clip. Rip hand.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
S tier. Yang Xiaolong Imani. So the skin does unfortunately take a bit of a nosedive comparatively due to a few issues that I find pretty resounding. Off the bat, when you're thinking of a character that you could use to represent Yang, pretty much the only clear choice is Imani. At the time, no other character had any kind of weapons even similar to Yang's deal. There just realistically wasn't any other options. Limited choice though obviously results in drawbacks. In this case, Imani and Yang do not even remotely complement each other in terms of personality, and I'm serious when I say that affects everything. Even Imani's default stance has a very regal composure to it, you know, calm, collected, solemn, serious, superior, all things that represent Yang about as much as a beach skin represents literally anything in Paladins. Yang is the laid-back, party girl kind of archetype, fiery, cracking jokes in combat, has a temper. As a result, none of Imani's poses or taunts even remotely work for Yang, except for maybe this one. It's not terrible, but that's just because it doesn't really work for Imani herself, I'll be real. It's just jarring hearing Yang's voice pack that reflects everything I just mentioned about her, while seeing her walk around and use abilities with animations that don't reflect her one bit, instead reflecting another character with a differing personality. It just doesn't work. Like, just look at her face. It's Yang alright despite some heavy eyeliner, but like that glare, it's just so, it's so menacing. What the fuck, Yang? And this time there isn't really any excuses that I can make like I did with Blake and Yang. Their skins kind of cause them to show sides of their personalities you don't see much. It's a little bit out of character for them, but you know, it's feasible. Meanwhile, Yang's character choice shows off a side of Yang that just doesn't really exist. She's not solemn, she's not superior, she's portrayed in the show as easygoing and jokey, for goodness sake. Oh, and speaking of jokey, the Yang voice pack. It's just
My battles off with the Yang.
the worst. I mean, I guess it's not that bad, but it takes a decent few lines from the actual show that were intentionally played off as lame, and that's kind of her deal. She makes lame jokes. In game though, it just comes off as so hard to listen to since nothing plays off of it. It's literally just a bad joke. That's it. It's so hard to listen to, man.
Time to do what I do best. Charge blindly into danger.
Just feels forced and unnatural a lot of the time. Not all the time, but yeah. The model looks okay. The hair doesn't carry over perfectly. It looks absolutely massive at the back. It's an engine thing though, I get it. Definitely could be worse. It's alright. It might just be me as well, but the pants area really suffers from a lower quality that I feel wasn't really as bad in the previous Ruby skins. Like, it's all just kind of a single texture kind of deal. I also personally just don't really care much for her outfit in general. Definitely the Ruby character I feel that would most have benefited from using a Volume's previous design. On that same note, her arms would look way better if they were just symmetrical with Ember Celica on both arms. Obviously that's not how she looked in Volume 7 to 9, they're not going to grow back an arm just for aesthetics, but it does just make it aesthetically way less cool. There's also this strange blue glow, kind of. It's only on her arms, more visible on her prosthetic. I don't really know what that's all about, it's kind of odd. And now finally we get to the biggest issue of the whole skin, Ember Celica itself. Because Imani's poses always have her hands open wide instead of how Yang would actually keep her hands in combat, because you know, she's a freaking bruiser and shit. Ember Celica just straight up clips through the entire fucking hand. A skin's weapon, especially for a Ruby skin, should be the most prominent part of the entire damn thing. The weapons in Ruby are so integral to the character's identity, it can't be botched, and they botched it. No. And you know, seeing clipping in 3P is one thing, but having the clipping still visible and even prominent in 1P, it's really bad. Not to mention the whole Ember Celica itself just doesn't really look that good in 1P. Ironically, her prosthetic looks way better despite what I said about it previously. In fact, I think I might take it back. Having the whole gauntlet on both hands will look janky as shit. And that is a good segue to how Imani's abilities mesh with Yang, or rather, how they just don't. Yang never uses ice, I'm pretty sure, ever. Even though she technically could with dust and all that, she just wouldn't. I'll be real. Fire she definitely would use. But the primary's animation, it's not like the Ruby skin where it works well enough to look lovely regardless. It just the poses don't hit. Yang shoots with her fists, Imani's is too magey. It just doesn't work. It's especially sad considering Nyx was released some odd patches down the road. I know that's another whole can of worms, but at the very least, if this Yang skin were for Nyx instead, one of the animations would fit. Like, at least one, man. And like, perfectly as well. It's a similar kind of deal with both of the alternate fires for the different stances. The custom effects are great, but the animations just don't fit Yang at all, unfortunately. Especially the fire one. I mean, come on, it's so clearly not even coming out of the weapon. I know they'd have to change the animations for this stuff to work. I don't want to seem unreasonable. I understand that effectively it'd be too much to ask, but I'm also just trying to be real. Without changing the animations, it just doesn't fit Yang at all. The dragon is a point where I kind of understand that, like, there was nothing they could do to adapt the dragon into something Yang-esque, so they just made a giant-ass Grim Dragon, likely the one in Volume 3 if I were to guess. Pretty dope. To undermine that, however, Yang's weapons are not customizable with Imani's other skins at all. And not only because Yang and Imani don't have the same skin tone on her left hand. If you try to switch it up, the prosthetic side looks legitimately unfinished. And if you want to use the dragon without major clipping or making your skin look like an unfinished mess, well, fuck you, I guess. You should have thought of that before buying the damn thing. But yeah, that's pretty much the entire thing. It's plagued with issues that aren't immediately prominent, but once you notice them, there's just no going back. Alongside the lackluster design and portions that legitimately feel unfinished, it really does feel like Yang got the short end of the stick here. But at least at base, the model by itself does a pretty good job looking like Yang, even if the design isn't that interesting. It's just legitimately everything else about the skin that undermines this otherwise pretty good quality of the skin. The end result, however, is indeed a D tier. Clipping is a problem. Qrow, Branwen, Corvus. I think it was kind of a weird decision to list all the characters' last names in there too. I think Qrow Branwen is definitely the biggest offender. It's not classic at all, it just makes it sound super pretentious. Okay, you know that thing I said about Yang's dragon? How the devs likely knew that they couldn't portray the dragon in any accurate fashion, and apparently just wanted to include something else from Rwby, regardless of how much sense it made or how well it works in general? That is this entire skin. Does Qrow fit Corvus's personality? No, not really at all. It is the same problem where it's painfully easy to tell that Qrow is performing animations that are not meant for him at all. Like, they don't even try to hide it this time. It's pretty funny. Like, just look at this stiff-ass motherfucker try to run. Look at him go. Does Corvus's abilities coincide with Qrow's at all? No, they do not. Corvus's teleport now includes a Qrow, which is pretty cool and a nice callback, but aside from that, what the f? Qrow can't fucking heal people? And then, of course, SMG. More like WHY. God, I'm really tired. So yeah, in case you didn't know, Qrow doesn't ever use this gun in the show. He just has one here because... and hey, I'll admit it looks pretty cool. Very generic MP40 looking ass thing, but it's alright. It's just that he'd never fucking use it. His sword is a gun. That's literally the mantra of the entire show. Everything is already a gun. Obviously, Qrow likes to swing that giant sword around like nobody's business, and that's not exactly something that can be reflected in an FPS. But did they really have to downgrade this giant ass sword that's almost as tall as Qrow himself to match Corvus's dinky little dagger? It looks so pathetic down there. It's hilarious. Now, despite that, it does look good, and it's quite accurately modeled. And this is coming from a guy that used to basically study these weapons to recreate them to animate with. AKA, I know my Rwby weapons and this is pretty good. Same kind of deal with his model. It does look quite decent, but there's just something wrong with his proportions. They're just not quite right. Like, he looks short as compared to his arms, and his hands look pretty weird, especially during some animations. The fact that his old idle pose used to hold his dagger kind of in front of his chest, it looked pretty awful with the Qrow skin, and it was actually changed very soon after the skin was released, probably for that exact reason. But yeah, other than that, just not very interesting in my opinion. His older designs from the show were a bit better in my opinion. This skin kind of shares a lot with Yang's skin, I feel. It fits visually in a very shallow way, but has a ton of issues beneath the surface, and for a crossover skin, that is a big problem. That being said, at least you can actually use this skin without being subjected to prominent clipping and tons of jank, plus you can actually use the weapon with other skins without breaking the model. Who'd have thought? It also does have the benefit of honestly just being funny. It almost feels like they didn't even try to make the characters fit together for this one, and instead just wanted Qrow to be in the game whether it made sense or not. The result is pretty ridiculous, quite amusing for a Rwby fan, and even kind of respectable in a weird way. That being said, I definitely wouldn't miss the skin if it just didn't exist, and instead they took the time / budget or whatever to work on polishing a certain other extremely janky and I'd say more important skin. Now, that's probably not reasonable to say. I'm not blaming anyone, but it does kind of feel like we're missing out on something higher quality due to Qrow's existence. Like, instead of 2 janky skins, maybe we could have just gotten a single high quality skin for Yang, or maybe even keep Yang as is, and in Qrow's stead, just choose a better character that's easier to put in the game instead of freaking Qrow Corvus for a higher quality result overall. For instance, Pura and Leon. I feel like that would work kind of well, although I guess she isn't really around in the most recent seasons for reasons. I don't know. I literally just wrote down, think up some character combos that'll work well. I don't know. Ren and Koga, maybe? I feel like that one would still have some big problems, but hey. What about, like, Betty Nora? I think that one would kind of be good. Yeah, I think that one would kind of work. You know, Cinder would actually work on Imani. Obviously, that's not viable now just because, you know, Yang exists, but yeah. Aside from that, fucking Professor Port on Buck, I don't know. Anyway, Qrow. It's just a weird skin with a lot of the same issues as Yang's. Not quite to the same extremes, arguably fits his character even worse, but gets a minor few ups for being goofy enough to pass as a comedy skin, because at the end of the day, it is a comedy skin, and nothing anyone can say will convince me otherwise. C tier. Salem Seris. Okay, now we are getting back into some quality here. I want to start off with my two major gripes to get them out of the way before I praise the skin. She has that, like, baby face syndrome that Weiss has, but it definitely comes off as worse here. The syndrome really is just that the face looks very cutesified, kind of anime-esque even. It's weird because only Weiss and Salem have the issue. I feel like all the others are pretty alright, but yeah, if there's any character you wouldn't want a cutesified face for, it'd be the main antagonist. It just doesn't come off quite right. Plus, it's just kind of not what Salem looks like, in my opinion. The other large issue is, why on earth is her skin colored? In the show, one of the most striking things about her is that her skin is pretty much bone white. Like, it's actually kind of important to her actual story and crap. It's honestly just a pretty bad oversight that I really feel wouldn't have been that hard to change. As such, it kind of feels like a deliberate choice, but I just can't imagine why. Like, at least she looks pale, I guess, but it's just not the same. It's not accurate. That being said, and although those are some pretty major problems, everything else goes pretty hard. It's almost flawless. The character choice to slap Salem over Seris goes over really well. Seris definitely seems like the ghostly wandering presence, a bit more passive than Salem, but you can really make an argument for both of them being either or, so really I want to say there couldn't have been a better choice. It works really well. Her garments also look great, very satisfying yet simple alongside the designs, and her hair looks perfect as well. Her weapon is kind of sick. It's a callback to one of her fancy grim that she uses to, like, spy on people, kind of like a glass ball. It obviously doesn't work as a conduit of magic in the show directly, but this was a creative choice that I think performs extremely well in game. The weapon fits with just about every other skin she has too, but most importantly the effects are amazing, and by that I mean both standalone and in concordance with the show. It looks almost like it was ripped directly from Volume 8. It's extremely accurate and it looks phenomenal. One of my favorite weapons in the whole game. It's unfortunate that her original voice actor couldn't voice her. Jen Taylor is a bit more high profile than Ruby's usual VAs, I assume.
Don't make a girl a promise you can't keep. This is the beginning of the end, Ozpin. And I can't wait to watch you burn.
The stand-in VA does just fine. It does feel quite a bit less conniving though, replacing that with just being super angry all the time, which really doesn't fit her perfectly.
Quiet, or I will make you.
Honestly sounds a bit more like how Cinder would be voiced. Not knocking the VA though, just the natural issues that kind of come with being unable to get the OG voice actor. For abilities, Salem uses a lot of general nondescript magic in the show, so to put a blanket on it, everything works just fine. Could she heal? Yeah, sure. Could she go invisible? Of course. Could she make a little black hole? Why not? Fits pretty damn well into Seris' kit. I really don't have any complaints. That about sums it up, really. It's extremely well implemented, I'd say. It'd be on par with Rwby or Weiss if it weren't for those two relatively large problems that we covered in the beginning of the segment. Like, seriously, the fact that she's not more whitewashed bothers me to hell and back. It makes zero sense. A tier. And finally, onto my other favorite Rwby character, Stellar Witch Lillith. So yeah, it was definitely a little odd at the time. A normal person would surely assume a skin in this position would be, you know, another Rwby skin maybe. Instead, we got little Miss Fly Me to the Moon over here. That being said, the excessive weirdness of the skin is mostly due to the context of its release. The actual skin itself is quite cute. Feels like a basic version of the usual Stellar skins, alongside that lovely texturing and shininess that all the Stellar skins have by default. The Stellar themed skins aren't usually that crazy in terms of detail, but will often have one or two quite interesting details or stylistic choices to round them out, even if that detail/stylization doesn't kind of work so well. With Lilith here, it kind of seems like the usual that you'd expect from a Stellar theme, but without any of those fancy details to make it more interesting. For instance, Io's is very basic and lovely, a few good details, but then has a super cool looking weapon that suddenly makes it way better alongside its general quality. Lilith's doesn't really have that X factor. It actually comes off as slightly jankier than the others as well. Definitely feels like a slightly more rushed Stellar skin. Like, the dress doesn't look quite as good as the others. The gold lining is slightly less clean with more jagged edges, A lot of the clothes are just textures instead of anything dynamic, and the hair definitely looks a little clay-like, less comparing to the other Stellar Sisters, but more so to her default itself. I like how it was adapted for sure, but it does lose a bit of the higher fidelity, I guess you could say. Though there is some of that sparkly texture stuff under her hair, which is pretty cool, and I do like how it's all kind of floating there like she's in zero gravity. Even though I listed a few cons a second ago, it is still a pretty solid stellar skin, meaning it does inherently look very aesthetically pleasing. Certainly catches the eye even with the simple design, has some cute details with the wings and her crest among other things, but it is just lower quality on average, and nothing in particular stands out. That is aside from the weapon, which is just relatively disappointing to me. Like, her default has this cool box thing with all these cool animations, and for this skin we just kind of get bear. Like, that's kind of it. It sure looks cute, but I don't know, man, it's just a bear. The projectiles just kind of come out of it. The effects look great, but it just doesn't, it's not a weapon. It's okay, it looks good, but it's not a weapon. It just really doesn't cut it for me. Overall, it definitely feels like a character's first skin. Like, Lilith was new, she needed a skin post-haste. What do we give her here? How about a skin with the theme already proven to work out pretty well? Sounds good, I guess. Even though the theme doesn't really fit Lilith all that well, I'll be real. Like, make a creepy, menacing-ass vampire, what's the first thing you do? Oh, just make it cute, naturally. You can definitely feel the conflicting styles creeping in to make it feel just that much more janky. Feels a bit like the awkward one that doesn't quite fit in with the rest of the group of the Stellar Sisters. You know, that fella that kind of just hangs around your friend group but really isn't your friend or anyone's friend. Plus, I think it's fair to say it's easy to tell that it was a little rushed to be added, especially considering this patch, like I said, has a grand total of 7 skins introduced all at once, the most ever implemented in a single patch. Makes you wonder, maybe their resources were stretched a little thin. Good skin, kind of feel like sticking up for it even though I have no reason to and nothing to back it up. B tier. Well, that was a bit of a doozy, I'm not gonna lie. And we are done for now. In that case, I'll make this quick. I seem to have been alternating recently with my videos, doing a skin tier list video, some other video, another skin tier list video, then some other video. I don't know if I'll keep that up as a general upload schedule kind of deal. I'm planning on just doing another skin tier list part after this one just because I want to. I want to chop down a few more patches than just the 2 I covered in this video. Maybe I'll do that. I haven't made up my mind yet. But yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching if you made it this far. I appreciate you. Check out my other skin tier list videos if you haven't. We've done 9 pretty lengthy episodes so far, so I'll slap the playlist in the description there. Also, feel free to check out the skin favoritism video I did recently. It's one of my favorite videos I've ever made. No pressure, of course. In the meantime, have a lovely day, evening, afternoon, or morning, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.